Turn to Daniel chapter 7, verse 3. We are studying the prophecy of the four beasts. This is our third lesson. The scripture says, "And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the others." Daniel had a dream and visions of his head in which he saw four great beasts that came up from the sea. This is reminiscent of the dream Dorothy had in The Wizard of Oz. You may recall that she, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man followed the Yellow Brick Road into the woods. As they entered the woods, they were concerned about lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Eventually, they ran into the Cowardly Lion, who tried to scare them with all his roaring and bluster, only to be found to be a phony. Daniel, in his dream, sees a lion, a leopard, and a bear. Oh my. But there is nothing cowardly about any of these beasts. And in addition to the lion, leopard, and bear, there is a beast that defies classification and is described as dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. In our previous lecture, we learned that God sent angels to help Daniel understand this dream. The angel to whom he spoke told him these four beasts are four kings, representing four worldwide kingdoms. The explanation he gave reminds us of the four parts of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which also represented four worldwide kingdoms. The interpretations of both dreams are the same. Four beasts represent the empires of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. We will now turn our attention to what this dream says about each of these kingdoms. The dream shows the beast coming up out of the sea, or as the angel tells Daniel, they arise out of the earth. There is no contradiction here. We are told simply that there are two sides to the nature of these beasts. The sea suggests the beasts are wicked and violent, and that they will continually disrupt the land of the Jews as they wage their conquest across the then known civilized world. The earth suggests that these kingdoms are beneath or inferior to God, in that they are materialistic and they disregard God in every meaningful way. While the sea and earth parts of their natures are similar, Daniel immediately sees that each beast is also different from the other. Adam Clarke comments on this. The people were different, their laws and customs different, and the administration of each differently executed. Each of these empires consists of peoples much different from the others. But the laws, customs, and administrations of each of the empires are not properly the subject or concern of the prophecy, so we won't study that. However, each empire begins with a monarch, but the cultures rising in each of the kingdoms shape the ruling power so that the ruling entities begin with the lowest and most singular form of rule under the Babylonians, which was a hereditary monarchy, and become increasingly more complex with each succeeding empire until we have the emperor and the Senate of Rome. Let's look at verse 4, which reads, the first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to him. It's interesting that Daniel includes himself in this vision of this beast, because he said, I watched until its wings were clipped off, and so forth like that. This first beast is like a lion, but a strange lion in that it had eagle's wings. The first beast here represents or corresponds with the head of gold in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which Daniel said represented King Nebuchadnezzar, and by extension, the Babylonian Empire. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar he was the head of gold, indicating he was the pinnacle of all Babylonian kings, none greater than he before or after him. Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest of all the kings of Babylon. Come on in. Nebuchadnezzar was long dead when Daniel had his dream, but yet the dream identifies him still as the proxy for the empire. The prophet Jeremiah saw Nebuchadnezzar coming from the north to bring disaster on Jerusalem. This is found in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 7, which reads, "The lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of nations is on his way. He has gone forth from his place to make your land desolate. Your cities will be laid waste without inhabitant." Jeremiah had a vision of the eventual destruction of Jerusalem and the land of Judah by the Babylonians. And in this vision, he saw them coming as a lion. So clearly the reference in Daniel's dream to the lion agrees with the reference to Jeremiah's dream of the lion in his prophecy. And besides Nebuchadnezzar being a lion in Jeremiah's prophecy, Jeremiah also saw the eagle's wings that swiftly carried the Babylonians over the land of Judah. Because if you go down to verse 13, you'll see this. "Behold, he shall come up like clouds, and his chariots like a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are plundered." So Jeremiah prophesied that the lion, the Babylonian Empire, would come as swift as eagles and trump over the land of Judah. And Daniel saw this same event. Even though it was in his past, it is still part of the prophecy that God gave to him. Daniel lived through the lion and eagle stage of the Babylonian Empire. But he also experienced a second attribute of Nebuchadnezzar. He says in his dream, "I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it." That's a strange thing about a lion. Here's this lion with wings, and then he sees it lifted up like a man and a man's heart given to it. Well, this is something that Daniel also experienced. In Daniel chapter 4, we read of another dream of Nebuchadnezzar's, which Daniel was called upon to interpret. In Daniel chapter 4, verses 24 and 25, he says, "This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses." God struck Nebuchadnezzar with madness while 7 times passed over him. This is a fact. The eagle's wings were plucked off, and he was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. In verse 33 of that same chapter, it says that in his madness, the only thing about Nebuchadnezzar that looked like an eagle was not any wings, but his hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. Quite a change from that majestic lion with those eagle's wings. He's like an ox, and his hair is all grown and matted and stringy, and his claws or his nails are grown out like a bird's claws. But the story goes on that God had mercy on Nebuchadnezzar because he could see through the man's pride and see some humility that would come out of this experience of insanity. Nebuchadnezzar writes in verse 34 of that chapter 4 of Daniel. He writes, "And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation." So here we see the fulfillment of what Daniel saw in chapter 7, where this lion was caused to stand up like a man. God stood him up on his 2 feet and gave him back his sanity, and recovering from his insanity, he no longer had the brutal heart of a lion. Instead, he had the heart of a man. And Nebuchadnezzar gave this testimony, probably in his own handwriting, as recorded in verse 36 and verse 37. "At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles restored it to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down." What a testimony of a pagan king. I'm not sure that Nebuchadnezzar converted to Judaism at this time, but he certainly learned to respect the God of the Jews, and particularly in his thinking, Daniel's God. If you think back to when he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Nebuchadnezzar gave credit to Daniel's God. And now he's experienced the might and power of Daniel's God, because Daniel's God struck him with insanity, but also healed him of that insanity and gave him back his kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar ruled Babylon from 604 BC to 562 BC. We do not know when his madness occurred during his reign, and we do not know for sure how long this madness lasted. The 7 times mentioned could mean 7 years, or it could mean 7 seasons, which would be about 21 months. During this time, however long it was, the tributary nations to Babylon rose up against Nebuchadnezzar in revolt, but they did not overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. 7 years would be about 16% of his total reign. And if it had been 7 years, he might not have continued as monarch without actually being deposed for such a long time. 21 months would be about 4% of his total reign, and it makes sense that his supporters could have held off an insurrection for 21 months. That probably makes the best sense. We can't be for certain, but generally when the scripture mentions something, the best sense is the correct sense. Nevertheless, with his man's heart that God gave him, he lost his courage and aggressiveness. He became feeble and afraid, so that he quit expanding his kingdom, and he ended his career with a weak reign as king of Babylon. 4 kings followed Nebuchadnezzar over the next 23 years. Truly, the kingdom was in decline after Nebuchadnezzar's death. And it is in this state of decline that Daniel sees the next beast suddenly appear and replace the decrepit lion. One does not normally think of a bear taking on and defeating a lion. But by this time, the lion was no match for this hungry and vicious bear. We will study the bear the next time we meet.